All right, welcome back to The Explainer. So, in our last few episodes, we've basically been the detectives, right? Hunting down the culprits of radio frequency interference. Well, today, we're swapping our detective hats for doctor's coats. It's time to talk about the cure. And just so you know where all this great info is coming from, this is part 9 of our 10-part series. It's all based on a super detailed report from the folks at RFI Detectives. We're diving deep into their Chapter 9, which is really the practical heart of their guide, giving you the actual steps you can take to fight back against RFI. So, are you ready to finally stop those glitches and fight back against all that electronic interference? Good, because after digging into all the problems, now we get to the fun part, the solutions. And we're going to cover everything from super simple fixes you can do in literally 5 minutes, all the way up to some pretty sophisticated engineering strategies for those mission-critical environments. You know, this whole RFI thing can seem incredibly complex, but the experts at RFI Detectives, they have this absolutely brilliant way of organizing every single solution out there. And it all boils down to just 3 core strategies. They call it the mitigation triangle. And what's so cool about this is its simplicity. Seriously, think of it like a public health response to a virus, right? You can either try to eliminate the virus where it starts, you can block it from spreading with things like masks, or you can vaccinate people to make them more resilient. It's the exact same logic, just, for electronics. Okay, so first up, suppress the source. Honestly, this is always the best place to start. It's all about going right to the device that's making all that electronic noise. That cheap LED dimmer you bought online, or an unshielded motor. You either fix it or you replace it. Simple as that. You're basically nipping the problem in the bud. But okay, what if you can't just turn off the source? I mean, you can't exactly tell your neighbor to turn off their Wi-Fi, right? Or shut down the local cell tower. That's where strategy number 2 comes in. Block the path. Here, you're creating a barrier. This is where you see things like shielded cables, metal boxes, or even just physically moving things farther apart. You're building a fortress to keep that interference out. All right, and for our last line of defense, harden the victim. So, let's say you can't stop the source and you can't completely block the path. What's left? Well, you make your own gear tougher. This means tweaking the device that's acting up, maybe adding some filters or those little clip-on chokes to its cables to make it more resilient to all the electronic chaos it's forced to live in. So understanding this framework, suppress, block, harden, is one thing. But, putting it into practice, that's what really counts. So let's look at some specific, actionable tips you can use right now, whether you're at home, in the office, or out on a factory floor. Okay, listen up. Because if you're a consumer and you take away only one thing from this explainer, make it this one. Go get some ferrite chokes. If you've got buzzing speakers or a flickering monitor, just snapping one of these little plastic and metal cylinders onto the power and data cables is often the fastest, cheapest fix you can find. It works by acting as a filter, blocking all that high-frequency electronic garbage that causes the problem, while letting the important stuff like power or your data pass through just fine. Now for businesses, this tip is absolutely fundamental. In any office or industrial setting, you've got to physically separate your signal and power cables. Keep them at least 12 inches apart. See, those high-voltage power lines create this invisible magnetic field around them. If you run your delicate, low-voltage data cables right next to them, you are basically guaranteed to get interference. It's called crosstalk. Enforcing this simple rule, just keep them apart, can prevent countless mysterious and super frustrating tech problems down the line. And this chart just brilliantly shows how these strategies can be applied pretty much everywhere. Seriously, take a look. Find your environment on here: home, office, manufacturing, healthcare. The experts have laid out the top actions you can take and exactly what kind of results you should expect. This is basically your RFI Fix It cheat sheet. All right, so this next section is where we level up a bit. We're going to shift our focus from just putting out fires, fixing today's problems, to actually preventing them from ever happening in the first place. This is all about changing your entire mindset. And this slide really gets to the heart of a critical idea in the report. Think about it. Are you constantly chasing down those annoying intermittent glitches? Slapping filters on things after a problem pops up? That's being reactive. And trust me, it's frustrating, it's expensive, and it's a huge waste of time. The real goal is to be proactive, to build an RFI resilient system from the get-go by making smart choices during design and installation. It's literally the difference between being a firefighter and being an architect. So how do you actually do that? Well, the key is to make this proactive thinking part of your standard operating procedure. When you're buying new equipment, don't just look at the price. You need to demand EMC compliance reports from the vendor. EMC, that's electromagnetic compatibility, is basically a stamp of approval that a device won't cause too much interference and can handle a certain amount of it. And during installation, you need to have clear written standards for how cables are routed and grounded. And here's the kicker. You have to actually verify that those standards are being met. Okay, so while a lot of these RFI issues can be tackled with the tips we've covered, the RFI Detectives report is super clear on this point. Some situations are just too complex or too critical for guesswork. Sometimes you gotta call in the pros. And this quote from the report really says it all, doesn't it? I mean, we've all been there, right? Trying one thing, then another, just hoping something sticks. But at a certain point, the smartest and most cost-effective thing you can do is to just raise your hand, admit you're stuck, and call someone who has the specialized gear and the deep experience to solve the problem, and solve it fast. So, when exactly is that point? When should you make that call? Well, according to the report, if your situation involves any of these four things, it's time to bring in a professional. 1, you're in a really complex environment, like a hospital. 2, it involves a safety-critical system, think fire alarms or medical life support. 3, your own efforts have just plain failed to fix a persistent problem. And finally, and this is the ideal scenario, you call them before a major installation to design that resilience in from day one. And that really brings us to the final big picture question that this chapter of the report leaves us with. It's a provocative one. Are you building for resilience, or are you just preparing for repairs? Because in our crazy, complex, and crowded electronic world, just waiting for things to break, well, that's not really a strategy anymore. We have to start designing for resilience. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. And you're not going to want to miss the next and final part of our series. We're going to take this idea one step further and talk about how to build an entire RFI resilient organization. I'll see you then.